If you love ancient history, then this is the channel for you. History Hit TV. It's like Netflix, but dedicated just to ad-free history documentaries, including a huge library of ancient history content from the 9th Legion to Boudica to the First Britain. Simply check out the details in the description below and make sure you use code Odyssey on sign up.
Time team get invited to all sorts of places these days, but they don't come any grander than this. This is Drumlanrig Castle near Dumfries in Scotland. But that's not for us. Typical Time team, what we're interested in is something that's been discovered round the back in the garden. There's not much to see on the ground here, apart from a few lumps and bumps. But look, this photo was taken from the air during a particularly dry summer, and you see all these strange shapes and lines. The experts reckon these could be the remains of a Roman fort. If it is, it could have a really good story to tell, because it would have been in the front line of the Roman attempts to invade Scotland. Time team have got just 3 days to solve this Roman mystery in what must be one of the largest back gardens in Scotland. Gordon,
hello?
This is your theory. Where do you reckon the fort actually is on the ground?
You're coming into it now. As you step through the gateway, the east gateway, and you walk in this direction, you go straight up the main road of the fort.
So, which of these lines do you reckon are the fort?
Well, most of them, I reckon. The light lines in the interior, which are the most obvious perhaps, are a grid of streets, where the grass growing over the streets is parching and showing as a light tone in this black and white photograph. Outside it, you've got the ditches shown as the dark lines, showing where the defences curve around the angles and down the straight sides of the fort, making, in all, a huge rectangular playing card shape.
Stuart, excuse my scepticism, but this is a huge 17th century house with the most enormous garden. This could just be formal gardens, couldn't it?
No, it couldn't. I'm with Gordon on this one.
How with Gordon are you?
I put my mortgage on this. It might be a northern mortgage and small, but I put my mortgage on this one.
Although this field looks flat on the aerial photo, it's actually full of lumps and bumps that Stuart reckons match up with some of the crop marks. Also, what I hadn't appreciated is that this site actually occupies a ridge of high ground, dominating this landscape and making it an ideal location for a Roman fort. Most Roman forts in Scotland were built of turf and timber and look something like this, with big defensive ramparts and ditches, a gateway on each side, and buildings laid out to a set plan. In theory, Roman forts were meant to be the same, but they very rarely are. In order to manage this landscape, the Drumlanrig estate wants to know exactly what's hidden underground here, and Geophys may be our best bet of giving them some answers. They already have some very promising first results, but need more time to complete their picture. I can't remember a time team when so many of the archaeologists have been so confident that we're actually going to find what we're looking for. But pride comes before the fall, gentlemen. Has what we've got here been tying up with the Geophys?
Yes, it has, and they're carrying on with the Geophys, and they're adding a great deal more detail to what we can see on the air picture.
So what part of it do we want to dig?
Well, lots of things would be nice to have a go at, but you know, we need to get some sort of chronology and sequence out of this first of all, don't we?
Yeah, and I think the best place to go for that would be the defences, the ditch system. In fact, that changes over time. If there are more than one phase of a fort here, we're going to see recuts. We're going to see sequence very quickly in the ditch sections.
I mean, should we go for near a gate, for example?
Near a gate, as near to a gate as possible would be good. And here you can see this road coming out of here.
Mick, Tony, give us an X marks the spot.
There, yeah.
So our first trench is going to investigate one of the defensive ditches around the fort. It's going to be a 10-metre long trench. And the first ever to be put in on this site. Trench 2, meanwhile, is going to test this geophys signal in what's thought to be the interior of the fort. Hopefully, it's going to give us our first look at one of the buildings inside. It's 11:20 and everyone's very excited, except me. I think probably the main reason I feel so sceptical is the one thing I know about Roman sites is that you get loads of pottery. But here, the only pottery anyone's ever stumbled on is one piece, this. Richard, where did you find it?
I found it just behind us here, Tony, in the Children's Adventure Playground.
Did you realise that it was Roman?
No, I didn't realise at all. We actually thought it was an old gardener's pot.
But you've got excited about it enough to want us to come here?
Well, certainly the site behind us, it was discovered in 1984 through aerial survey, and that's really all we know. You know, Roman camp, piece of pot, that's the story so far.
Aren't you surprised there's so little Roman pottery?
No, not really, because the place has never been excavated, it's never been built on, and it's never been ploughed. So all the normal factors you would require to bring finds up to the surface to be discovered haven't taken place here.
Richard's find is the base of a Roman cooking pot, and we've reconstructed it to show him what it looked like. It was probably made by the Roman army on this site, and although it's what I'd call a bog-standard bit of greyware, according to Guy, it's more significant than that.
If we'd found this piece of pottery down south, it'd be just a tenner penny, we'd find loads of it. But we're up here in an environment where the indigenous tribes knew nothing about that kind of pottery. And it's a symbol, if you like, of the impact of Rome on a virgin piece of territory.
A bit like the cola can in the middle of the jungle.
Yeah, exactly.
This Roman pot dates to the 2nd century AD, and it's our first clue to when this fort was occupied. But apparently our experts think it's likely that there was an earlier fort here as well, one that dates to the Romans' first attempt to conquer Scotland in the 1st century.
40 years after the Romans invaded in 43, the governor Agricola, in the early 80s AD, is bringing the Roman army right up into what we call Scotland, garrisoning it as he went and building roads.
So would Drumlanrig have been at the sharp end of the military campaign?
Almost certainly it will have been one of the key forts that Agricola built to garrison and hold the routes he was taking to control into Scotland. But it doesn't last very long. Not long after Agricola leaves Britain, all of this area is given up by the Romans. Now, some forts remain in commission, but most of them were dismantled and abandoned. And the Romans withdraw down to here, the area we call, well, I suppose, northern England between Carlisle and Newcastle.
Hadrian's Wall?
Yes, but not yet. It's not until the 120s AD that Hadrian fixes the frontiers of the Roman Empire and he builds the wall here. That marks the limits of Roman Britain for the moment. But it doesn't stay like that, because there's so much trouble from the tribes in southern Scotland over the next 20 years. The Emperor Antoninus Pius, who succeeds Hadrian, decides to push the Roman frontier north again. He builds a new wall up here, roughly where between Glasgow and Edinburgh are, and he puts Hadrian's Wall on hold. And this whole area of southern Scotland, where Drumlanrig is, has to be re-garrisoned. And many of the old Agricolan forts from the late 1st century are recommissioned.
So if the experts are right, there could be at least 2 stories to get to grips with in the grounds of Drumlanrig Castle. There could be traces of a 1st century fort here that was abandoned after only 5 or 6 years, and also another fort built on the same spot in the 2nd century when the Romans made another attempt to conquer Scotland. It sounds like it's going to be tricky to sort out, especially looking at the size of what I was calling Trench 2. Mick's strategy for the interior of the fort is to dig test pits. But you're not going to learn much from a trench as tiny as that, are you?
All we're going to learn is what sort of deposits are in there and handfuls of pottery that give us some sort of date from it.
Why here, John?
Well, look, we've got the geophysics. There's the main road coming through. You can see it on our plot, and the streets going off to the side. There's actually a road going across here. The main road there.
So it's like that, isn't it?
So we're in the corner, and there should be a sort of building, maybe a barrack block.
Well, there ain't much of a barrack block there yet.
Well, not yet.
Just rubble.
No, but if it was a timber building, it'd probably sit on rubble like that anyway, wouldn't it?
Has it given you any clues so far?
We got 1 or 2 bits of pot.
Pot?
This one here, look.
Well, that's doubled the amount of Roman pot they've had so far. Is this the same sort of age as Richard's piece?
Yeah, it's 2nd century stuff, so it's probably towards the end of the life of the fort. So there must be earlier stuff underneath.
So you're going to keep going down here?
Yeah, I mean, we're drawing it and recording it now, and then we'll go down and see what happens.
Yeah. We've opened up another test pit over this geophys signal that could be the remains of a corner tower. Already it's turned up some pottery that again tells us something about life here in the 2nd century AD.
So we have some properly Roman pottery, little jar rim, but this is coarse Iron Age style pottery, but it's not earlier than this material, it's contemporary with it. It looks as if for their very coarsest, cheapest pottery, they're buying the ordinary pottery they can find in the locality.
Buying it from the locals who are living around, presumably.
Yes.
So would the local people have been coming into a fort like this and flogging them stuff, or would they all have been the enemy?
They'd certainly be coming in because, of course, by the mid-2nd century, the frontier's moved north. It's on the Antonine Wall between Glasgow and Edinburgh. So this is within the Roman province. So the people here are beginning to go through the process of becoming part of a Romanised province. And all kinds of supply and interaction is going to start taking place, yeah.
You can imagine if you drop 500 troops in an area, just like today, there's going to be all sorts of goods and services they're going to need, which I'll leave to your lurid imagination to work out.
We don't want the only good bit of dating evidence we find to be on the spore heap.
Archaeologist Helen Geek wants the metal detectorists to check the trenches so as not to miss any clues, particularly to the type of soldiers living here. We don't know for sure, but we'd expect this fort to be occupied by auxiliary soldiers.
Based on the size of the fort and the aerial photographs, we suspect it auxiliary soldiers, not the main citizen legionaries.
So auxiliaries, is that kind of like territorials?
No, these are the provincial soldiers, the ones hired by the Romans to do all their frontier work, their fighting work. They would earn their citizenship by working in the army for 25 years. Right. But they're incredibly flamboyant. They're the ones who love parade dressy armour on their tombstones, particularly the cavalry, who are always flashing around with standards and showy parade dress armour.
With the excuse that it's just possible that we might find evidence of the Roman cavalry here at Drumlanrig, we're going to attempt an experiment that's never been done before. And to do it, we've got metalworker Tim Blades making us this rather unusual Roman standard.
It's the Draco, the dragon head-shaped standard, which first appears in the 2nd century, introduced by the Sarmatian cavalry, but it becomes so popular that most of the Roman armies start to use this kind of thing over the next 200 to 300 years.
So are there many archaeological finds?
No, there are very few examples indeed. What we know about them most of all is from stone reliefs, which they're carved on, but the historical sources that not only describe them, but describe the awe-inspiring and eerie sound that they made.
And do we know how that sound is
No, we
produced?
don't. So the challenge for us over the next 2 to 3 days is, can we get a noise out of this?
Absolutely.
It may look like a jelly mould at the moment, but it's far from finished, and tomorrow we should be ready to experiment with the kind of noise it made. Meanwhile, in Trench 1 over the defences, things are going well.
What's that then?
Along the side.
Oh, you're talking about these wonderful swords here?
I certainly am.
Yeah, they look
It looks like we're finding the layers of individual turfs cut by the Roman soldiers to build the rampart around 2,000 years ago.
And the brown stuff on top of them is the decayed organics, isn't it, of the sort of grass side down, side down turf, like that.
And the great thing is we've also got this ditch down here. We're Phil's digging. Looks like there's a ditch that's contemporary with this rampart. Yeah, it's really nice.
While in this test pit, what I was calling Trench 2, I'm lending a hand and learning that timber structures leave fairly subtle evidence. I've got something here, something black, which looks to me either like a fireplace or a post hole, I don't know.
Well, charcoal at least. It'll need cleaning up a bit more to see the edges, won't it?
I thought I'd cleaned it up. Could this be packing around it?
It could be, or Gordon was saying it might be to support timbers for buildings. Remember I said to you earlier that if you put timber buildings up, you don't see much trace on the surface when they've rotted. But, you know, if you've got to level them up with stones and stuff, and it's those stones that we get in lines like that, isn't it? Yeah.
How much cleaner have I got to get this thing?
Well, as clean as you can, really. You don't want any of that loose stuff lying about. You know?
Well, that's just my little pile.
Well, you shouldn't leave little piles, really, like that.
Sorry. Having a go, you've only just arrived.
I've gone through the stage of doing the digging like that. I'm like the surgeon who's dropped the doctor bit, you see.
But there's no doubt about it, today's biggest success has been the Geophys survey of this field. It's revealed what's effectively an archaeological map of the fort.
It's stunning good.
You beaut. Well, we started to fill in the gaps on the aerial photograph. There we could see the main street and the roads going off to the side. Here we've got it in the geophysics and all the details of the barrack blocks. Now what we've got in this area here is a rather large, perhaps stone building.
Yeah.
And why does that make John such a beaut?
Here we have the central range of buildings here, with the huge courtyard building, which is the Principia headquarters building, right in the middle.
Both Gordon and Tony are sure that this is the headquarters building. And it's possible that these white lines on the geophys indicate the only stone building in the entire fort.
But the important thing is you now know the layout.
Yeah, we can navigate our way around the fort now. We can name the streets. So that now is the Via Principalis. This is the Via Praetoria. We know exactly where we are now.
It would be a great relief for me to see a bit of stone, because so far all we've seen is shadows in the ground.
Well, you're going to see it soon in that small trench across the wall there.
Well, I started the day wondering if there really was a fort here, and geophys have proved it to me in the most spectacular way. This trench should reveal the stone remains of a 2nd century Roman headquarters building.
That looks pretty encouraging. Turn it into a building now.
But in the rampart trench, Phil looks like he's ready to call it a day after working his way down towards the bottom of what's turning out to be a very deep defensive ditch. While further along the trench, Bridget has unearthed what may be the stone edging that reinforced the bottom of the rampart. It'll all be made clear to me tomorrow. Apparently, they think they've also found traces of an earlier rampart as well.
Well, I don't reckon that's a bad day's work, Tony. I mean, just in this one trench, we got evidence for 2 forts, and it's beginning to look as though the second fort was deliberately backfilled into the ditch.
So have you finished now?
I wish we had. No, we've got to keep going right to the bottom, and hopefully we'll actually get some dating evidence, certainly for the second fort.
OK, so we've got a ditch and we've got a rampart. Even I've got to admit that that says there's a fort here. But tomorrow we're going to get inside it and hopefully find some buildings and maybe even evidence of the people who lived here. And that's the part I'm looking forward to. Beginning of day 2 here at Drumlanrig in Scotland, where we're looking for a Roman fort on this high ground based on this air photo. Yesterday I was pretty sceptical, but my scepticism was misplaced. We've got not just one Roman fort, but 2. But if this is Roman fort, what about this and this stuff and this and that? Not to mention exploring the inside. We've got so many targets and we can't dig them all. So what's our strategy going to be? Phil? I thought I'd start by asking the people who are actually doing the digging. What would they most like to find out more about?
God, Stone of Crows.
I'd really like to look at this building here.
What is it?
It looks like it's the main headquarters building. We've got solid foundations and some really nice dressed stone.
I mean, I'd love to go for a gateway, but that's going to be too much for what we want.
I think we should go for the buildings in the centre here, actually, because we can see this is a fort. We know the ditch is going around the side here. It'd be really great to get in and find out what the actual uses of all these buildings were.
Why the barracks?
I know, hopefully we might find some evidence of the soldiers actually being there, and that would be really nice.
I think I'd go for that.
Why?
It's a really strange geophysical anomaly, and none of the archaeologists can tell me what they think it might be.
Find the early fort.
I'd want to know more about what's going on outside the fort. Are there any annexes?
I've never heard such a long wish list of things to excavate. And although Mick agrees we can't do everything, I'm surprised to hear he reckons we can do most of it.
The idea of coming here was to evaluate what it is. There's this super air picture, super geophysics now. What does it mean? So we've got to dig a lot of holes in it so that, you know, people like Historic Scotland and the estate and so on know what they're dealing with. So where we actually put them, I'm quite happy if somebody says, well, I want to know about the Principia, or I want to know about the barrack blocks.
I should have guessed. Mick's plan is to dig more test pits. This way we can look at several areas. So we're opening one here over John's strange geophys signal, and 2 more in the interior of the fort. Although I'm not keen on tiny trenches, this one, Trench 2, where I was helping yesterday, seems to have paid off and revealed traces of a wooden building.
Matt, I believe you're the only one with finds trays that are filling up.
Yeah, absolutely.
What have you got?
Well, we've come down in this trench onto this burnt layer, which looks like the destroyed building, and
Well, hang on, do you mean destroyed or demolished?
Ah, well, there's the key question. I think it could well be demolished because quite often these forts were razed to the ground by the soldiers as they left.
That's exactly right, they cleared the whole place.
And we're getting things such as the daub there from the walls, burnt clay.
Right.
And we even have some of these carbonised wattles.
Yep. So that's the wood framing in which the clay was packed around.
Yeah.
So it looks like they've knocked that down and then set fire to what was left over of it.
Yep.
Yep.
There are a few of these nails here, these large ones, and I presume they would have been holding the actual building frame together.
And probably made in the fort itself, in the workshop.
Right.
Almost certainly, yeah. That looks rather interesting.
Yeah, these came out of the kind of stone rubble above. I think they've been reused as building material, but that definitely looks to me like it's been smoothed down.
Yeah, it's a quernstone, isn't it, for grinding corn?
Mm-hmm.
That's really good because, you know, that's the first evidence we've actually got of people living and eating here.
Right.
That's the whole process of the soldiers staying and perhaps wintering in this fort in between the campaigning seasons.
Well, there's actually one other thing which I wouldn't mind you casting your eye over, which I found. This little bit of metal.
Oh, yes.
I couldn't work out the end of a metal strap or something, but it didn't fit with the nails. And
well, there's an edge there. Do you see the corner there? Right, but it's covered in corrosion. It's just possible that it's a piece of scale armour, which is the sort of thing you might associate with auxiliary troops, but you know, it's very, very difficult to say.
All our evidence so far is building up a picture of the fort in the 2nd century AD. We've got a wooden building with wattle and daub walls, which, due to its position, we think may have been barracks. We're also digging up the remains of what's thought to be a much fancier building made of stone. Richard, apparently one of the really exciting consequences of you inviting us here is that we found the Principia right here. Although that's all I can tell you because I've no idea what a Principia is.
It's the headquarters building, the main administrative centre of the fort, a very elaborate structure. And one of the big surprises we've had is that it seems to be built of stone. Now that's something we weren't expecting. This looks like it's the Antonine or the mid-2nd century, around 140 to 160 building. Have a look at this.
At the moment, it just looks like rubble to me. But then Guy was expecting me to say that.
We're in the courtyard. See this group of people here?
Yeah.
That's roughly where we are. we're in the middle of a courtyard. What we've just seen where Kerry's digging over there.
So where's that?
Is this front wall here.
Yeah.
So just follow me.
Yeah.
If I run up here.
Come on, Richard.
Right, I'm now standing roughly at the entrance to that big hall, OK? So stay where you are. I'm now running round the hall, which is a little bit like a small parish church, up to here.
Yeah.
Round to the back. This is where the shrine is, where the unit standards and valuables are stored.
Yeah.
All the money, all the gold and silver possessions that some of the officers might have had.
Yeah.
Right the way up here, down to the end of the hall, passing rooms that may have contained all the paperwork that recorded the unit, and it's where the soldiers have been stationed, where they had to go, all their duties, that kind of thing. The end of the hall here. Now I'm moving out into the courtyard, so this is the big courtyard area where the commandant might speak to the officers of the unit, call in troops for disciplining or religious services. They had a whole religious calendar they had to follow, dedications to the emperor and everything. Come back to here, okay, and this is the front gate into the headquarters building, and I'm looking out through that, up through the road that leads through the north gate of the fort.
Meanwhile, there's no way anyone would confuse this with one of our test pits. It's our 10-metre-long trench across the fort's defences. The news here is that Phil reckons he's found a couple of post holes.
What do you think about that? Second post hole to one I had yesterday. Look, there it is. There's the one I've got now. And look, whacking
massive,
great post
isn't it?
hole there.
Yeah.
Phil's impressed by the sheer scale of the fortifications, but also intrigued to hear Guy's theory that they were probably never attacked.
The Romans wanted to fight a particular type of war with their defences, and they liked set-piece battles. But up here in Scotland, you've got various different tribes like the Votadini, the Selgovi, the Novanti. They don't want to fight that kind of war at all. They've got a much looser idea of fighting, and they're not really stupid enough most of the time to come and attack this sort of place. They want to wait out there by drawing the Romans out into the forests and marshes when they're out foraging for food or supplies or on the march, and operate a guerrilla warfare. So the fort will have looked great and be very impressive.
But it's no use at all.
Well, because the tribesmen weren't stupid enough to come up and attack this.
I suppose it's a good way to spend your labour while you're up here, isn't it, really? Just build a fort, chaps.
There's nothing worse than a bored soldier or a bored archaeologist, so back to
I
it.
want to carry on, yeah.
In the stables at Drumlanrig Castle, we're preparing for an experiment by making a type of Roman standard called a Draco. This ornate dragon head is thought to have had a silk tail, as pictured here on Trajan's column in Rome. It was used by the Roman cavalry to scare the enemy because it was said to have emitted a noise. But what type of noise, nobody knows.
Wow. Oh gosh, that just makes a noise just with the air that's around us.
It's just the wind working on a flat ribbon.
Wow.
Kite maker Peter Taylor has been experimenting. He reckons that Chinese whistles may be the answer.
And if we get some...
I'll stand back.
Stand back a little bit, and we should be able to get
Oh.
just a little bit of an idea. So we think this is the right sort of noise. It's meets the bill for eerie.
It certainly does.
And it's quite loud. And it's loud at quite low volumes. Why don't you have a go?
I'd love to,
Just hold it like that and swing it round.
Okay. Which way?
The way that works. The other way, that's it.
Wow. That is just extraordinary.
Yeah, I think it's the right sort of noise.
And the Draco's head will then be coming out this way.
Well,
and have you put it on yet?
Not yet. Well, that's the challenge, is to try and make this arrangement work somehow inside the Draco head.
We're supposed to be walking along a Roman road that led from the headquarters over in that direction through this way. The flag's supposed to indicate where it is.
What do you mean supposed to indicate where it is? Look at that.
Is that road?
Yeah, I think so. You see the cobbled surface there, and it's dipping down this way.
So it sort of cambers, does it?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the camber on one side, and then the other side is marked with the black bucket over there.
So the road would come all the way over here and then dip down here.
It's going that way.
About 6 metres wide. And what you've got to realise is there's been a big gatehouse structure here.
How do you know that?
Well, you can actually see it on the geophysics. Big structure here, the road probably divided.
Yeah, it'd be two carriageways, wouldn't it, coming in?
So I would be standing on the road with the gateway there, with a big double arch going kind of there and then over to there.
Yep.
With Victor's help, I do feel as though I'm starting to get a sense of this fort in the 2nd century AD. This test pit open today has revealed the remains of what may have been the stone footings that supported a timber building, and some nice finds. Oh, is that amphora?
It is, it is.
Wow.
You can speak the language of the pottery specialist.
So how big would this amphora have been?
Would have been about this high off the ground. A big teardrop-shaped vessel with a couple of handles and a narrow neck. Very heavy. Even a big lad like me would struggle to lift it.
Why would it be here?
It's here because this is the Roman army's way of bringing the olive oil they need for cooking and for lighting.
For lighting?
Yes, these little tallow lamps with a little wick use olive oil as well.
And where would it have come from?
This is from the south of Spain, the valley of the river Guadalquivir that comes out at Cadiz, which is the big olive growing area.
But the test pits can only tell us so much. This one put in over this strange 5 by 10 metre geophys signal has come down on a wall with a clay lining, making our archaeologists think it's a structure that holds water. But exactly what it is, here on the junction between the two main streets, has our experts baffled. We'd need a bigger trench and a lot more time to solve this mystery. The feeling now is that it's time to change our strategy. Some of our test pits, like this one over the Roman road, have done their job and can now be closed down. Our experts are keen to persuade Mick that we should now concentrate our effort on learning more about the headquarters building.
The headquarters building, the Principia, it's the centre of the site.
Yeah.
It's not only the military centre of the site, it's also the cult centre of the site. And right in the heart of the headquarters building, you've got the Chapel of the Standards, which is where literally the standards are laid up and venerated.
Right.
Where
it's a cult centre, really.
It's a cult centre of the imperial cult, of military aspects of the imperial cult. So you've got...
Yeah, but there's another special factor here for Drumlanrig, isn't there? Our fort that we're digging. Yeah. Because in many cases the whole fort would have been built into stone. What's interesting about here is that that's the only building they've got round to building in stone.
And
so, as Gordon says,
absolutely reinforcing the importance.
They've put what resources they've got here, and they've only got as far as putting their major resources into that building.
Yeah. Well, if they have, then we should. Although we now know from some of our trenches that the area of the fort has been shallow ploughed, probably in medieval times, it hasn't gone deep enough to damage the archaeology. We've got a rare opportunity to investigate the site of a Roman fort that seems to have survived intact. or at least just as the Romans left it 2,000 years ago. We're now opening up a second trench across the HQ building. We are, of course, still continuing with the big trench across the defences. Like elsewhere on the site, we've got plenty of finds dating to the 2nd century fort, but we'd love to be able to prove that the early phase of rampart we've discovered was built during the first Roman invasion of Scotland in the 1st century AD.
Is it sorted yet, Phil?
No, it ain't actually, Mick. We're getting there gradually.
It's a heck of a hole, though, isn't it?
It is a heck of a hole, as you say.
Come and tell me what's going on.
Well, we've got the ditch here.
Yeah.
Beautiful ditch.
Yeah.
I'm actually wondering whether or not we might actually be looking at the ditch of the first fort,
Right.
which is merely refurbished by the second fort.
Right.
Because here's the actual front of the first fort.
Is that these big post
That's
holes
these
here?
big post holes.
Right.
And we come through the actual bank of
Yeah.
the first rampart, and we get here, which is the front of the second rampart.
Oh, right, right.
So they've actually bodily moved it backwards.
Presumably he's built a turf or something at this
That's
stage.
right.
is he?
We got beautiful imprints of those in a section of
Right,
the plan.
right.
As we go on, we go up into the turf rampart, and in fact you can see that mirrored.
Oh,
in
you can see the earthwork coming
that's
through,
right.
can't you? Yeah, yeah.
As we come along, we've got a row of stones here.
Nice row of stones,
which
yeah.
I wonder if that's not actually the back of the first
Right.
rampart.
Right.
Because through here we have a gap which could be this big row of stones here, the back of the second rampart. In other words, the whole thing has been bodily
Bowled
moved
over.
backwards.
Right, right.
And in fact you can see this coincides with the back end of the earthwork.
Again, the back of this lump, yeah. yeah
That's just
yeah.
one possibility.
Yeah, you've got various phases of shifting, haven't you?
That's right. Another possibility is that we've actually got a roadway running along the back of the
Right.
rampart here, and we've got burnt material in there, which could illustrate ovens.
Yeah, because you get those at the back of the rampart.
That's
don't
right.
you?
So at some point this fort was made smaller. But tell that to Geophys, who've walked miles surveying this site and today have been testing a brand new resistance machine that will not only give them more detailed results, but allow them to do the job quicker.
What we've done is we've moved from the Zimmer frame to the wheelchair.
Which is quite appropriate for you, John, isn't it?
Thank you very much.
But that's it for today. Tomorrow, Geophys will be targeting outside the fort while we try to get to the heart of the story inside it. And we have a Roman cavalryman paying us a visit to test our Draco. Day 3 and our last chance to disentangle the evidence of at least 2 Roman forts that occupied this ridge of high ground. Yesterday we put in this trench to find the back wall of the 2nd century headquarters building, which isn't clear to see on the Geophys plot. The news today is that it hasn't hit the building, but it has turned up lots of Roman finds. And is this what I think it is? Could that be a hobnail?
Yes, it's got the big conical head and the curved over tail to it.
I told you I wanted to see evidence of one particular soldier, Mick. At last we've got it. The finds are all coming from what seems to be a Roman midden or rubbish dump that was sealed under this cobbly layer. Both seem to date to the 2nd century occupation of the fort.
So there's actually quite a lot of archaeology in this trench.
But we still want to see more of the headquarters building.
Phil?
So Phil's opened up another trench.
Do you reckon that you're down on top of the headquarters?
How the hell should I know that, Tony? I've only just opened the trench, we've only just cleaned it up.
All right, well, can I ask you a different way? Why did you put in your trench here and not in the forest?
That is a totally different question. Working from the principle of the known to the unknown, we appear to definitely have the headquarters building there. Yeah. We think we've probably got the corner of it in here.
It's quite patchy, this earth, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this looks like the same destruction stuff we've had elsewhere of sort of charcoal and daub, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this is massive burning, really big, heavy burning. But you know, like I say, we've only just opened the trench, Mick.
You're telling us to go away, aren't you, and leave you to get on with it?
I'm trying to be polite.
Yeah, I can see that.
It didn't work. See you.
Now that Phil's working here on the headquarters building, Bridget's in charge of finishing our dig across the fort's defences.
and 8, 9. It's about 9 metres.
She's trying to make sense of what's left of the 9-metre wide rampart.
Well, the problem with all these turf ramparts is, of course, none of them survive because they're fundamentally unstable. They rot and fall away. So all you've got left is what the Romans chose to leave behind. Now,
these fragments of burnt wood are intriguing, and Guy reckons they were used to strengthen the rampart.
So they use a series of timbers to frame it and hold it together as it tapers up to the walkway. So all you've got left are the bottom layers and perhaps some of the timbers, which is what those might be, that were used to lace the rampart to frame it.
When the Romans came here, they were looking for somewhere to which they could dominate the landscape, somewhere close to guard a river crossing. And what they found here was absolutely ideal, because two sides of it are actually almost at a right angle. They got two sides of a Roman fort ready-made for them.
This fort at Drumlanrig is positioned at the junction of 3 Roman roads and is ideally located to guard a fording point on the River Nith.
We know from aerial photography that there's a temporary Roman camp in this field down below us here. You can't see it now because the conditions are not right. And there's a big marching camp in that field on the other side of the river. What that tells us is that must have been a fording point in this river here. There's a camp either side of it. So you can see how there's almost like a clustering of Roman activity around this point.
Having looked at the maps, Stuart knows this has been a fording point since the 1700s, and it may be the actual crossing point used by the Roman army.
It's such a good choice of location that would have been the same for all different periods, from the early forts right through to the later forts.
So is that why you think that there was this continual phasing of fort activity on that
That's
side?
right. There was no need to move. This was a critical place in the domination of this valley to be able to control where they crossed the river.
In Roman terms, this was a small fort, probably housing something like 600 soldiers. Although some of them may have been outposted to man one of the very small fortlets, like this one at Durrisdeer, just half a day's march away. With so many Roman soldiers around, it's surprising that this is the first coin we've found.
The size tells me straight away it's Roman small change from the 1st or 2nd centuries.
Right.
But it's a little bit smaller than the 1st century ones, so for my money it's going to fit with that Antonine date pottery we've had off the side. So it's going to be probably 130s, 140s, 150s. I guess that's what it's going to be. But the key thing is, where did it come from, Matt?
Well, we're getting underneath this demolition there, and it's just onto this floor surface, just lying on the floor surface here.
Right, so it's going to date the destruction above that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can I ask you about this now, Phil?
Yeah, I think you can, Mick.
You've calmed down a bit, have you?
Not at all. You see, it does pay for you to go away.
Well, absolutely, yeah, because it looks good, doesn't it?
Well, it does. I mean, I don't think there's any question about it. I'm slap bang in the middle of the headquarters building.
I mean, that looks like a really good hard floor you've got there.
It is. We've got this wonderful pink mortar floor.
In fact, we're finding evidence of the same mortar floor in both of these trenches across the headquarters building.
Yeah, well, you can see this label 513. It's exactly the same floor surface as Phil's got.
Right. So what, is that a foundation trench you've got there?
No, this isn't a foundation trench for this stone at all.
This big stone is thought to be a step, one of the few that's left in situ.
But sat on that is this floor here, and below it is another floor layer.
Is this our two forts? I mean, it looks like the 513 layer and my floor could be the second fort.
Yep.
And that 515 layer could be the early fort.
Yeah. So that's our first glimpse, actually, in the bottom of that hole of what's going on under all this lot, isn't it?
It just gives you an idea of the potential of this site, doesn't it? It's
So
awesome. It really is.
We're only
awesome.
just going to tickle the surface, aren't we? What time we got
That's
left?
right.
Yeah.
Today's also our last chance to test our Draco, a Roman cavalry standard shaped like a dragon. It was said to have made an eerie noise, and once we've managed to fit these Chinese whistles inside it, we'll be testing it on horseback with the help of this reenactor. But in the meantime, I want to ask him about a bit of Roman bronze that's been found by our metal detectorist.
Quite conceivably, it could be part of the one of the myriad variety of bits that Roman cavalrymen used in their horses' mouths.
Yeah.
You can see that extensions of that sort. It's possible.
Yeah, yeah. But even, let's say, this has got nothing to do with a horseman at all. Is there any proof whatsoever that
Alan isn't just dressing up in a totally redundant fashion, because there were never any horsemen here at all.
No, there were horsemen here. We know from Tacitus' Agricola that he brought up auxiliary cavalry up here.
It doesn't mean they were here.
No, it does, because look at the landscape down there. In the ancient world with an ancient army, how are you going to be highly mobile, fast, get across this landscape in a matter of minutes rather than hours and days? You come with cavalry like this. Just think of the imposing effect that is going to have on the local people. It's all about power and image. Of course you've got cavalry up here.
But what would a Draco have sounded like as the Roman cavalry charged into battle? Having conducted a quick test on pedal bike, we can't get our Draco to make a noise. Apparently, it's time for plan B.
Having the flutes inside the dragon head, we're hitting all sorts of problems. The flutes weren't making enough noise, but also the more flutes we put in, the less air we get through the dragon head, so the less well the tail works. So you get into a sort of vicious
so
circle.
all the components aren't working properly together.
That's right.
It doesn't look as bad as I was expecting almost.
Oh, thanks. That's very reassuring, Helen. Thank you so much.
To begin with, they're hidden away inside the head, and it's all neat and tidy. But here, I thought that it might look a bit messy, but actually it's almost reminiscent of the blobs that you see on Roman standards on coins.
Yes,
so it looks quite neat.
That was one of the things which gave us the idea.
So does it work with the whistles on the outside? Could this be the weird sound used to scare the locals some 2,000 years ago? It sounds eerie to me, but it must have sounded really strange in an age that didn't have as many artificial noises as we do today.
Right, Phil, where's your floor? That one there.
Meanwhile, back in the trenches, we've opened up a few more test pits to help us work out the layout of the huge headquarters building that stretches across here.
Phil, 6 centimetres different, so same floor again.
Oh, that's very good.
And the midden, or rubbish pit we discovered here, has got even more interesting. Not only has it produced lots more finds, such as Roman glass, but underneath it we've now revealed an earlier structure.
What these look like, to me, is timbers, or the positions of timbers that have rotted away.
That's exactly right.
Is that what you think these were?
These are earth-fast timbers, framed together, pegged and jointed together, supporting a superstructure but firmly bedded in the ground, floorboards over the top.
Right. So we're looking at an earlier phase of Roman timber buildings, barrack blocks or whatever they are.
Yes, it is. It certainly predates the metal surface that we're on.
Yeah.
But the pottery that came out of it was all 2nd century, so it's part of the second major phase of the site.
So there could still be an earlier phase of fort underneath?
Absolutely, yes.
So even though we've found 2 different layers inside the fort, they both seem to relate to the 2nd century occupation of the site. We're talking about a period of something like 20 years, long enough for turf and timber structures to need repairing or replacing as needs changed. And in the absence of any dating evidence in the bottom of this 3-metre defensive ditch, the feeling is that the 2 phases of ramparts we've unearthed both probably date to the 2nd century too. It looks like any evidence of a 1st century fort, if it's here, will be buried too deep for us to find. Yesterday, you were the one who said you wanted to work outside the fort to see if you could find any evidence of anything really early. How have you done?
Well, the thing that I was really excited about was this little ditch here. It forms like a triangle. There's the fort, and it seemed to sit on the outside of it. And what I was really interested to know was whether it came on, is it part of an annex coming along here or whatever. So we asked the Geophysics to do this area down here.
Geophys have surveyed this area, but they can't find any continuation of the ditch, leaving Stuart to conclude that the annex could be shaped like this. But what's an annex for?
We don't know a huge amount about annexes. We think that they could have been there and they could have held things like animals that might have been related to the fort, or possibly industrial activity that they didn't want to take place inside the fort.
Late 1st century.
Gordon reckons this shape could be really significant. He thinks it's identical to an annex found at a fort at Stracathco.
Snap. There you are. That's the crop mark at Stracathro. This is the crop mark at Drumlanrig. The little triangular area and the continuation that Stuart was talking about is the equivalent of, shall we say, that area there. Here is the annex, just the same shape, although 4 times bigger than Drumlanrig, and here is the corner of the fort on its side to which it's attached at Stracathro. Exact parallel.
Stracathro is classified as a definite 1st century site, and Gordon now thinks that this could be proof of the same early occupation at Drumlanrig.
Is what you're saying that the best evidence for 1st century activity is this annex?
That's
is that
right.
what you're saying?
In terms of structure, yes, at the moment.
So you found something really good and you didn't even know.
That's why I was so excited.
Geophysics' completed survey has revealed lots more buried archaeology for the experts to think about, and it can now be studied against our 3D model of the site. But most importantly, what the Geophys plot has given us is a much clearer idea about the layout of the 2nd century fort.
We can put on the ramparts and the ditches. Now we know about those, obviously. Phil's dug the trench right the way through it, so we've got a pretty good idea of that. Now we've got the headquarters building, which Kerry and the others have been opening the trenches up across, so we know that building's there, and it's pretty clear from the geophysics. Now that's the nodal point, if you like, and from this everything else pans off. So we can put in the other buildings according to the geophysics.
That's very good, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can really see those in the geophysics.
So there's the barracks, probably for the infantry. There's our headquarters building. I put granaries here and our commandant's house, but to be honest, we really can't be certain about exactly where those were in this fort. More barracks here, perhaps for a cavalry contingent, if there was one here. We end up, therefore, with roughly 480 infantry and possibly 120 cavalry at the end. Standard Roman unit.
Guy may be right, because it looks like there were definitely some cavalry here.
So if one of the trenches behind you...
This is really exciting. This is so Roman Imperial cavalry.
Really?
Yeah. It can only work in a limited number of places on the harness. As you can see, the main harnessing on the saddle itself, which stops the saddle from either moving forwards or backwards, has these fittings.
Right.
So it's more likely to be perhaps here, or on a brow band, somewhere where it's going to be more or less permanently in place. Line of them polished up, they'd look fantastic, as all of this harness does.
But for a Roman site, we've had relatively few finds.
I really expected there to be bucket loads of stuff.
Well, there are bucket loads of finds around here. They're just not on the fort because the Roman army did its housework when it packed up. It didn't leave the stuff around for the enemy or for anybody else. It cleared away the fort. And all the archaeology we've produced just suggests that this is a very complicated site with a lot of occupation, with several occupation layers in a very tight date range, but neatly cleared away every time.
And in most cases, we haven't gone into those layers of archaeology. We've just come down onto the top of them.
Which is precisely what we've done on our 2nd century headquarters building in several trenches. Finally, what can we say about it?
We didn't know whether this was a dividing wall or the back wall of the main building.
This is of the headquarters building?
The headquarters,
right,
yeah.
Right.
There might have been a room coming this way.
Right.
So we put this trench in.
Yeah.
And all we've got is this road surface. That's all we could see on the geophysics.
But there might be something in this gap, mightn't there?
There might be something, but come and look at Phil's trench.
I've cracked it. I tell you, we've actually got all the components in here. We've got the main road and it actually stops here. And the reason it stops is that it's butting up against the back of the main wall.
It's difficult to see because the stone walls have been robbed away, but as I understand it, Phil's located the massive back wall of the building, and inside it, evidence of a room with a wooden partition wall and the trace of what might be a dais or raised floor. It's likely that this was the Chapel of the Standards, the room at the heart of the headquarters where they kept items such as a bronze Draco and the other valuables. And as we found lots of evidence of burning within this huge building, it seems likely that the Roman soldiers set fire to the headquarters just as they did to the wooden buildings, before leaving Western Scotland for the last time and withdrawing to Hadrian's Wall around 160 AD.
We've got it, we cracked it.
And all the result of the geophys.